has been a frequent guest on radio and television and national TV, covering the national politics, local politics. He's the guru on KSDK when it comes to election day, and he is very knowledgeable. I've participated in many of his presentations at the Lifelong Learning Institute over at Washington U. And we're very lucky to have him on this most auspicious day because we could talk about and hear about the new vice presidential candidate. So without further ado, I'd like to present and introduce Professor Dave Robertson, chairman of the Political Science Department at UMSL.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be invited to talk to you and to lay out some of what the landscape looks like. It has changed substantially since the beginning of the year. So let me go through this and just talk about some of the circumstances. Then I want to talk about the central issue of this election, which is the presidency of Donald Trump. So let's go through this. Once upon a time, can you read all of that? Once upon a time, just checking.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So once upon a time, everything was springy for the President Trump re-election campaign. Things looked very good for Trump in the early part of the year in February. And you'll remember perhaps that there were headlines that talked about Americans' confidence in the economy higher than at any point in 2 decades. And national satisfaction, whether or not things are going in the right direction or if they're on the wrong track, highest in nearly 15 years. Well, that translated into approval for the incumbent president, one of the most important indicators of whether or not an incumbent president is doing well or doing poorly as the election comes up is how popular or unpopular the president is. Well, his job approval rating was at his best. He's, as we'll see, never been more popular than unpopular, except in the first days of his presidency. But that gap had closed by the second month of this year. And nearly 2/3 of voters expected Trump to win re-election in November, one of the polls found. So that was the landscape not very long ago. Well, things changed and everything caught fire, disaster, collapse, all kinds of things, everybody trying to escape as fast as they could. Gripped by disease and unemployment and outrage at the police, wrote a headline in the Washington Post, America plunges into crisis. This is by the end of May. That changed the election. This is COVID. Over the course of the year, the United States passed the European Union. Both were coming down until the United States in many places reopened. And that caused a big, serious problem in COVID in the US. So the European Union seems to have handled things relatively well. Brazil shot way up here, and the United States also shot way up in COVID cases. This morning, the Federal Reserve Board said US virus efforts have been a failure, flat out failure. And that was reopening too soon in the spring. And it hurt the economic recovery, which is just a dangerous twin of the coronavirus epidemic, because it means that things are shutting down again and the economy is not going to recover as fast as people hoped. The stock market is perhaps ignoring that, at least it was yesterday, but that's going to be a problem going forward for a good deal of time. And this is not an epidemic that is just hurting urban areas, which tend to lean very strongly Democratic. It's not just St. Louis City. It's not just Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York City. This increasingly, because the cities and the urban counties like St. Louis County did restrict the reopening for a good deal of time, it looks like some of those problems have caught up in rural areas. This is a graph of counties that voted for Clinton and how COVID proceeded there. And the red line are counties that voted for Trump and how COVID is proceeding there. They're just about the same by the beginning of August. That is a political problem for President Trump and for Republicans. And support for Black Lives Matter has greatly increased since the death of Michael Brown several years ago. Far more Americans support the Black Lives Matter movement. Around St. Louis, Black Lives Matter is resonating in white neighborhoods and all neighborhoods in ways that were much more limited right after Brown's death in Ferguson. The protests over the killing of Floyd are the broadest in American history, and they're spreading even to white small town America and even in conservative towns like Springfield, Missouri. This is true across the country. But I always look at the economy first, and the economy has just turned around since the spring of this year. Unemployment in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 was going down very slowly. And then after February, it shot way up to about 15%. That's a level that we were at in about 1931 as the Depression was increasing in its scope. Now, we did reopen. Some of the businesses were able to make a little bit of a comeback and to rehire people, but the problem here is that that brought unemployment down to about 10%. And the question is whether it's going to stagnate there going forward. It may. There's another issue with the unemployment rate. When you hear that announced on the first Friday of the month, it reflects measures that were taken in the middle of the month, so that by the time that statistic is announced, things may be different because, as you can see, things change very quickly in the COVID economy. Layoffs are way down so that fewer people are drawing unemployment insurance, or as you saw this morning, are filing at slightly lower numbers, under 1 million for the first time in several months. But more and more of the layoffs are long-term, which indicates that we're going to have long-term layoffs going into the future until businesses feel more confident to be able to rehire those workers. And some of the businesses themselves won't be back. One of the numbers that's really dramatic to me that I always watch, what kinds of impact is this having on individuals, on real people? Is the whole thing cutting their real income, controlling for inflation? Are they being able to keep up with the lifestyle they want? Well, as you can see, coinciding with unemployment, real income really took a hit, went down almost 10% here. It's made a comeback, but it's still way down from the past recent years. And that is a very serious problem that's not just economic, though it is that, not just for individuals, and though it is terribly that, but for the elected officials who are presiding over things, because fair or not, those officials, and especially the president, are given credit for good times and given blame for bad times. So under that umbrella, in this context, Well, election 2020 is now underway, and people are waving the ship goodbye. This is the Titanic sinking in 1912. People were very happy about saying farewell, at least for a little while. This election is centrally all about President Trump. People who are up for re-election in the Senate, people who are up for re-election in the House, even state governorships, all are centered on President Trump. This is from the Republican Party website, and it features Donald Trump at the center of attention. Many people, not all, but many, will be thinking about how they feel about Donald Trump when they vote for any Republican candidate. So, in 2016, just to return to that, President Trump was able to win election in the Electoral College, even though he lost the popular vote. Let me explain that. And if you don't know what an inside straight is, somebody else can explain it to you, but it's a really good hand poker that nobody expected you to have because you didn't have the cards. Here's the 2016 vote. And what I want to emphasize is a couple of things. President Trump, now President Trump, lost the popular vote, the number of ballots cast across the entire United States, and he lost it by 3 million votes. That was a pretty large loss in popular votes. But he was able to win the Electoral College because he won the Electoral College by what looks like a big margin, but actually it's not that big. It's centered on 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. President Trump was able to win 46 electoral votes, Wisconsin 10, Michigan 16, Pennsylvania 20. 46 electoral votes. If he had lost all 3 of those states, he would have lost the presidency because Hillary Clinton would have won the electoral vote as well as the popular vote. But she didn't, because President Trump won narrow victories in those states. How narrow? About as many people as it takes to fill up one very good sized Big Ten stadium. This was mine when I was an undergraduate, so I like to feature the Wisconsin Camp Randall playing field. But it could, less than 100,000 votes were the margin by which President Trump won the election. And again, to be fair, California gave 6 million votes to Hillary Clinton. And if those votes were spread across the country, she probably would have won. If they had taken only 100,000 of those votes and spread them across these 3 states, she would have won the election. But that didn't happen. Just as President Trump found, there are some states that vote so overwhelmingly for you that the votes are, in your own mind, kind of wasted. Hillary Clinton had 4 million extra votes that couldn't be used elsewhere from California. President Trump had quite a large number of extra votes from Texas that he couldn't use elsewhere. Wyoming had a lot of extra votes, but there wasn't many votes at all to win Wyoming because, well, basically nobody lives there. It's, in Wyoming, if you've been there, you know that it's very easy to keep social distancing rules if they're set at 6 miles instead of 6 feet. How popular does that make Donald Trump? Well, if you look at his whole term in office, except for the very, very first days in office, back here, he's always been more unpopular than popular with people in public opinion polls. Now, this is an average. You can see lots of individual dots. that are orange that show disapproval. That's each dot is an individual poll. And what I like to see somebody do, and they do it on 538, they do it on Real Clear Politics, is to take all these dots and average them out so that they can see how the average changes over time. You can have an error in any one poll. Take it all together and you get a little bit better idea of what all the polls together are telling you. And you can see in a couple of cases, disapproval went quite a bit up. In the last several months, this is January of 2020, you can see that approval was doing pretty well for Trump, and they had this big boost when COVID came into play. But he's been losing support, a little bit of an uptick lately since that time, since April and May. So that a large majority, 55% really, disapprove of the way President Trump is handling his office. And about 42% approve of the way President Trump is handling his office. And that often translates into how well you're going to do in the election. And remember, this election is all about President Trump. He's made it that way. Take a look at these three elections, 1980, 1992, and 1920. In the spring of the year, these three presidents were underwater. Like President Trump today, they had a lower approval rating by a good percentage than an approval rating. They were much more disapproved than approved among the public. And in fact, on that day, after 1,229 days in office, in spring of this year, they were at about the same place. Now, remember what happened in the elections of 1980 and 1992. If you look at this chart, this shows what percentage of the vote different presidents got in elections and how their net approval rating was. That is, subtract the disapproval from approval to find out how much underwater, that is less than zero, minus 10, minus 20, or how much approval, how much they're above the water and floating very nicely. That would be Nixon and Reagan, that had approval ratings approaching positive 20%, and very few disapproved of them going into their first reelection, their only reelection. This chart shows you that three candidates have pretty much been well below zero, that is, have had negative approval or more people disapproving them than approving them. Going into the spring of the year, 200 days before Election Day, Carter in 1980, George H.W. Bush in 1992, and Donald Trump on April 25th. We know that Bush and Carter were blown out in the general elections, that Reagan won a landslide over Carter, that Clinton, although he didn't win a majority of the vote, combined with Ross Perot, who also won about 20% of the vote, Bush finished very, very badly in that election. Obama, George W. Bush in 2004, Jerry Ford in 1976, all were able to hang around as much approval as disapproval, and two of them won re-election, Bush and Obama. Gerald Ford very narrowly lost the popular vote and the electoral vote. Nixon, Clinton, and Reagan, of course, won landslide victories. So, earlier this week, what's the average in the polls? Who are people going to vote for? Again, this is an average, a line that connects and summarizes the way all these dots are going as we take polls every day about who's leading or who's losing in the race for president. As of August 9th, Joe Biden was ahead with about 50% of the vote. Donald Trump was about, almost 8% back. Probably that's narrowed a little bit now to about 7.5%. And that's where the election stands now. But that doesn't mean the election is going to turn out that way or that Trump will lose. Those who like Trump are counting on that. Those who don't like Trump are very nervous about that. So, can Trump win another straight in the Electoral College? Can he pull a straight in the Electoral College? It's not easy to do that, but it's possible. What could happen is that the polls are likely to get closer. I think they're closer now than they were early in the week. There are states like Florida that I expect to get much closer, that Trump could win. We don't know how many people are going to turn out in a pandemic like COVID-19. If Democrats turn out at a lower rate than Republicans, then Democrats are at a real disadvantage in winning the popular vote in close states. The president will stop at nothing to mobilize his voters, and I'll say a little about that. And the Electoral College, it still tilts Republican, and that will benefit Trump relative to Biden because it's just because that the states have a limit on how unequal their electoral votes are. Every state gets as many votes for their senators, and I'll have 2 senators, as they do in the U.S. Senate, as in the Electoral College. All right. So Trump, we have seen, is running the election in a way to pull the second straight that he was able to use to win in 2016. He wants to energize the Make America Great Again, the MAGA base. He wants evangelical Christians, people in rural areas, people who have generally not much college education, if any. And he has staged events that emphasize his commitment to, for example, religion and to patriotism. So a big event was held in front of Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. He used that speech to use a divisive culture war message, talking about how his opponents represent a new far-left fascism that imperils American values and tries to erase history. That was targeting, that last comment, targeting the move to abolish some of the statues of the Confederate generals and erasing their names from U.S. Army bases in the United States, military bases. He has also tried to bypass Congress, most recently dramatically on the weekend, where he issued 4 executive orders. And the Associated Press, which has fact-checked these, sort of lays out that they're a lot more limited than the president made them sound. Let's go through each of these so you really understand what's going on. The White House argued that it would provide $400 a week as an extension of the kind of unemployment benefits that were provided by Congress early in the year and that were running out. The White House, with the executive order, would provide $400 a week. But that's not exactly correct. States are going to have to kick in at least $100 a week for each of their unemployed in order to hit that 400. But if you were in a public university, you would know that the states are in a terrible, terrible economic position and really can't afford to come up with that money. And many will probably not add that extra $100 for the qualified unemployed. So that would reduce the amount of money available. And in fact, it's not clear that anybody would get anything if states didn't pick up their share. On healthcare, the White House claimed that an executive order issued last weekend requires health insurance companies to cover all pre-existing conditions for all customers, and that it's a big thing. It has never been done before. That is false. It's law. It's law in Obamacare, passed early in the Obama administration in 2010. That has been the law for 10 years. Tax relief. The White House claimed that the employee portion of the payroll tax would be deferred from August 1 through the end of the year. That is a worker's part of Social Security would not be collected from that individual beginning August 1st and going through December 31st. So that sounds like a good deal. But this deferral is a loan. It's not a subsidy. It's not going to free you up. It's going to have to be repaid in January, which is really going to be hard on people who are still not working full-time, who have still faced permanent unemployment, or have been hired back part-time or at a lower rate of wages. So these executive orders, well, there's a lot less than it seems. Now, where does the election stand today in what matters? The Electoral College. Deep blue states, particularly the District of Columbia, is going to go heavily for Joe Biden. California, Oregon, and Washington will be a West Coast wall for Biden. Illinois and the Northeast will mostly go for Biden. Right now, states like Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico are likely to vote for Biden. And some others are leaning toward Biden, including all of those states that made the difference for Trump in 2016. Nevada is something Trump has mentioned quite a bit. The election, though, is being fought in these states that are swing states. President Trump is going to have to win back at least one of these states or find a way to win, say, Minnesota or Nevada to approach 278, because right now, Biden has blue states like this. Add them all up, they amount to 278. You need 270 to win. So right now, add up these states. If they vote this way, Biden will win the presidency. Here's the thing people have not noticed. The states are always changing demographically. Some are getting older, some are getting younger, but they're also changing in terms of race. Donald Trump got a big turnout among whites who did not have college degrees. And he won his election in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by winning those votes. But if turnout among groups remains the same, if all the turnout is the same, 4 years later, demographic change alone is going to reduce Trump's vote and increase Biden's vote. Why is that? Because there are fewer whites voting in those states. demographic change in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin in the last 4 years. White voters who have no college are down 2% in the population. White voters who have college degrees plus minority voters have grown 2% in those states. And the demographic gap is even a little bigger in a state like Arizona, which has been trending away from the Republican Party for a few years. Trump, in other words, is going to have to increase his support among white non-college voters and the turnout of these voters, which was exceptional in 2016. It's going to have to be more exceptional going into 2020 to win those states. And Kamala Harris added to the ticket the first Black who is named a vice presidential candidate, the first Asian American who has been nominated for vice president. She's half Indian American, is going to make, I think, a little bit of a difference in adding to Biden's turnout in key states where there are a lot of Black voters, including Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and a few other states. She is a plus for Biden, but again, a caution that vice presidential nominees rarely make a difference for presidential candidates unless they make some mistakes that make voters doubt the presidential candidate. So we'll see how that goes. She'll mobilize a few white non-college voters in states like Michigan, but that may not be enough to counterbalance the other trends. So just a touch base quick, the Senate. Democrats have one seat that they're likely to lose in Alabama. Currently, they have, the Republicans have 53 seats. They'll probably pick up the Alabama seat, which means that Republicans probably could, all other things being equal, if they kept all their seats in the Senate, wind up with adding one seat. But that's not going to happen because many Republican senators are very vulnerable in election. This is from the Cook Political Report. One of the seats, I think, it may be likely at this point to go Democratic so that McSally would lose her seat in the Senate. That would be one Republican seat down. These incumbent Republicans are all in danger. You should not be below 50% approval, and several of them are. You're probably not too surprised if you're following the news to see Senator Collins on here from Maine, but you might be surprised to see Senator Joni Ernst on this list. Democrats, if they were to sweep all these, would have a majority in the U.S. Senate. If they took half of these, and if Joe Biden won the presidency, well, the presiding officer in the Senate would be Vice President Kamala Harris. She would vote with the Democrats and give them the narrowest of majorities needed when the votes are tied. But there's other seats that are vulnerable, including a Georgia seat, a Kansas seat, and by a stretch, they're likely to go for the Republicans, but it's not certain at all, including the Senate Majority Leader. This is a whole lot of states. If an election is a landslide, as Ronald Reagan found, he won a lot of seats and a Senate majority because of his landslide victory in 1980. And in the House, all the members of the House are up for election. This looks a little more balanced. And the reason is that so many Democrats are elected in 2018. They're running for the first time in many districts that were toss-up districts and were often held by Republicans. So they lean Democratic, but there's going to be a fight for those. There are toss-up seats on both sides, and Rodney Davis in Illinois up toward Springfield is one of those. And most strikingly for us in the St. Louis area, the seat held by Ann Wagner is just a toss-up right now, because Jill Shoup is what in political science we like to describe as a quality candidate. That's not a judgment of Jill Shoup. It's an estimate of the evidence that, first, she has experience, she has run in elections, she has won a lot of elections, she can raise money, she can build a good organization. All of those things work in her favor, but Ann Wagner has a very large war chest, and she's using that money to pay for elections that you've seen on local TV news. Here's a hint as we go into October. Keep in mind that if you like Jeopardy, you better like political ads, because it's going to be on between rounds of Jeopardy. Okay. Just to finish up here, we talked about the problems and the opportunities that Trump has motivating his base to show up and to vote. That was critically important to him in 2016. He's running his election as if it will be decisive this year. But what's different is that Trump was not an incumbent in 2016, but he is now. And the whole election, and the election of people in the House and the Senate and in the states, is turning on Donald Trump, because it's Trump's political party, the Republican Party. Will turnout equally be boasted by opposition to Trump? Well, just one illustration from the New Hampshire primary earlier this year. Here's a poll of Democrats voting in the 2020 New Hampshire primary. It included this item. 62% of New Hampshire Democrats would rather see a giant meteor strike the earth and extinguish all human life than see President Trump get reelected. And there's the meteor. I think Democrats are going to come out and vote, and that is a very serious problem for President Trump's reelection strategy. We'll see. Well, I have to say thank you very much. I love the opportunity to speak with you. If there are questions, I'd be happy to entertain them, and possibly someone can moderate those questions and, call on people to come on in. Okay? We good?
We're all good.
All right.
There is a question that was a chat question from Bill and Jerry Livingston. Can you hear me, David?
Yeah, the speakers are not so great on this, but I sort of have gotten rid of my earphones at this point. So let me see if I can make this full screen. Here, okay. There you go. There's everybody. Okay. All right. Okay. Shoot.
So there was a chat question from Bill, and let me see. My chat disappeared. Hold on just a second. From Bill and Jerry Livingston, they said, do you think that Harris will have more of an impact because of Biden's age and the fact that Biden has announced he will not run for a second term?
No. And the reason is, I think a lot of people are not going to know what Biden said, and it doesn't mean that he won't run for a second term, depending on how he feels. And I think for some voters, I think they're reassured that he didn't pick someone like Elizabeth Warren. I know a lot of people like Elizabeth Warren and a lot of people really don't like Elizabeth Warren, but she's an older individual as well. And I think people feel a little reassured that it would be a person 55 years old who would step in for Joe Biden if he were unable to continue as president or if he stepped down as president. I think she's a prohibitive favorite to get a nomination if he does follow through and declines to run for a second term.
Harvey, do you have a question?
There's been a lot of concern about Biden's cognitive, how well he's going to be able to handle the campaign, and that he might have some problems with dementia. Do you see this really as a problem?
I don't yet, until he shows that his problems go further than his gaffes. I've always thought of him as a kindly older uncle who says crazy things at Thanksgiving. And he does do that sometimes and misspeaks and doesn't say exactly what he means. And I think I understand what he means, but he does make mistakes and he's going to make more of those mistakes. But that's who Joe Biden has always been. If he says some things that really make people wonder about his mental faculties, then I think a bigger problem is going to come up. I'll bet you any money that he's going to say something that will raise those stories 2 or 3 times in the campaign, if not more. But I think for the most part, as long as people feel confident that it's just Joe Biden's personality and his way of talking about things rather than some serious mental problem, that he'll be okay. And remember, he's now got Kamala Harris to explain what he meant and to sort of smooth things over when he makes those gaffes. Does that help?
This morning, the president announced that if he gets reelected, he might eliminate the payroll tax, which means that he's going to change the way that you fund Social Security and Medicare.
That's right.
The question is, what is that going to do to his likelihood of winning Florida, where you have a lot of retired people who really don't want to see Social Security being altered so drastically? Right.
Neil, you're asking a big question that is a real problem. I think that the president has kind of a short-term view of this, and if you put income into people's pockets, that they will vote for you. But I suspect that if you an issue like this that can be characterized and will be characterized as an attack on Social Security to make Social Security bankrupt, it'll do the president as much harm as benefit going into the 2020 election. And you are identifying the key state in all this. If Florida, on NBC and ABC and CBS, if on election night the unlikely event occurs that they declare Florida for Joe Biden, I think that's the election, because they will, certainly some of the states he squeaked out a victory in last time will now turn to Biden, likely. And remember, there's a lot of retirees still living in their original home states, not having moved to Florida or the swing state of Arizona, where there are also a lot of retirees. So I think it's a dangerous, dangerous move for him, because he's giving his opponents a narrative of what this is going to do to them. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
Leslie Jacobson has a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you think it's time to abolish the Electoral College? Wow.
Well, did you have more in the question? I'm sorry.
No, that was it.
Okay. I thought so after 2000, but because I think, Americans want to vote directly for their president like they do for their senator and their representative. I don't think we had a problem changing the Senate. There are people who disagree with that as if it's going to make a big difference. I don't think it's going to make a big difference. I think eliminating the disparity that exists in the Electoral College would be a real plus, and people would feel more confident that their vote matters if they live in San Diego, where they're piling up a bunch of votes that are not necessary for the Democrat, or if they live in a Utah where they're piling up a lot of votes for the Republican candidate, and they're not going to be useful. Having said that, and I support direct election somehow, as long as the United States puts the election of the president in the hands of state governments, we have a problem without national rules about this. Because as you could see in 2000, you had to wait forever to find out who actually won Florida and therefore the election. If that happens, if we have a direct vote for the president, we could be waiting on 10 states to decide who won the popular vote in their state. And I think that would be a very unhealthy thing for American democracy. That means for the ability to abolish the Electoral College, we need some strict national rules, and the states are not going to like that very much and resist it. And their senators will resist it. So yeah, I believe in direct popular vote of the president, but trying to make that work is a big challenge. There are ways to get around it. If you win the popular vote in a state, some states are passing laws that say they will divide their vote based on the percentage instead of the winner-take-all principle on which the Electoral College is based within their state. So if you win 60% of the votes in Colorado, you get something like 60% of the electoral votes. That could work if everybody does it. But I'm not sure all the states are going to go along, unless there's a national law. Thanks.
Thank
We
you.
have 3 questions in the chat box. We have one from Martha Krepke. What impact do you see on early mail-in voting on the campaign and election outcome?
I think it can be decisive this year. I think it made a big difference in some of the primaries earlier this year. I think, remember, mail-in votes are the way you vote in Arizona, for example, and other states. Mail-in voting is taken for granted in a lot of places. Certainly it is for us, and I know I did, and probably some, if not most of you, mailed in your vote for the, for example, St. Louis primary in earlier this, well, a couple of weeks ago, I guess now. So mail-in voting can make a big difference. There are a lot of mail-in votes in that August primary. There will be a lot of mail-in votes this year, unless all of a sudden there's a vaccine and you never have to worry about going to a restaurant or a gym or a polling place again. I doubt that's going to happen, and I'm of an age where I'm not going to risk it. I would love to go to a restaurant again, but I'm not going to go to a restaurant with my wife and she feels the same while everything is locked down like this. And I'm sure a lot of you feel that way too. Did I answer all your question? I think that mail-in votes will reflect who's most enthusiastic about voting. And I think it's going to be at least an even match between the Democrats and Republicans, with the selection of Kamala Harris helping get black votes out in some of the states where there are a lot of black votes. And that could be a big help in states, again, like Georgia, possibly, I think this is a stretch, but possibly in a Texas.
Could I ask?
Snyder had asked, what is your view of the Missouri governor's race?
Do I have a view of the Missouri governor's race? I would say conventional wisdom would say Parson would win for the first time. And he also has pretty good ads introducing him. This is the get to know the candidate phase of the campaign. And he has plenty of money to get that message out. Nicole Galloway has gotten that message out. She's behind in money, but I suspect she's going to have enough to get her message out too. I think Parson, I would say, has an edge in this state which leans conservative and is expected to vote for Trump. I'll tell you, if this state becomes too close to call by election day, this election is over because Biden is winning lots of other states that should be closer than ours, including Texas, but probably won't. And I think Parson has a real edge. But people don't know Parson. So the critically important thing for Parson is to make sure he's known positively and to get on the air doing that and taking shots at Nicole Galloway as much as he can without wasting a lot of money, not making himself look like a good, safe candidate. And by all accounts, he's a pretty nice guy and he looks like it in his commercials. So the question's going to be, is Parson going to be hung with Trump? Is he going to be associated with Trump? And I think there are ways Democrats can do that. Is Nicole Galloway going to be hung with crime in the streets and rioting as the Parson campaign is trying to do? And is Galloway in particular going to be as well known as Parson, and are both going to be very well known going into the general election? And what are they going to be known for? All of that is open, so that's a really hard one to call. With 80 days left, I would say the incumbent governor has an advantage, but watch this race because it could go in a direction that none of us really expect it to go in right now. Is that helpful?
Jerry Bamberger, do you have a question? Oh,
yes, I do. Yes, I do. To what extent are you concerned that Trump will disrupt the election if he loses?
I'm concerned about the mail-in votes and how they're going to work. But remember, the states run the election system, and Arizona is not going to change its mail-in voting law, even though it could help Democrats in this election. Probably will help Mark Kelly defeat the Republican in the Senate in that state. Could help Biden defeat Trump in that state. But so that's where I see some disruption and what I'm worried about. I'm not sure what's going on with the very partisan head of the United States Postal Service right now and his effort to slow things down on that front. Having said that, I'm a little less worried about, well, I'm not too worried about the president refusing to leave office in January if there's a landslide for Biden, or even if it's a pretty clear vote. I think some of the remaining incumbents, especially if Mitch McConnell gets defeated, have much less of a stake in keeping Trump around and would not be nearly as supportive as they have been up to this point. And they're breaking with Trump a little bit, and he really hates that. So he's trying to keep those senators in line. If it's a close election and Trump can claim that irregularities helped tilt the vote against him, then I think we'll probably have a legal case and we'll have 2000 over again. We'll have this decided by the Supreme Court. I don't think he's going to go against the Supreme Court myself if he loses there. Will the Supreme Court decide against him? Well, I think it could, because the long-term interest of the judges goes way beyond a Trump administration, even if they're conservative. So that's kind of the way I think about this right now. Maybe it's a hope, but I think that there will be people ready to help President Trump leave, and he will be assisted in leaving if worse comes to worse from the White House, and he won't have many people to stop that from happening. That's my guess.
Could I ask another question? How did we get to where we are? You know, it used to be that the centrists in both parties used to control the agenda. The Rockefellers, you know, Scoop Jackson.
Right.
And now, you know, they used to talk civilly to each other and discuss things, Tip O'Neill and Reagan. Now we are, you know, represented by Jim Jordan on one side and AOC on the other, and we don't talk civilly to each other, and we just shout at each other. How did we get here? What happened to our political character?
So how many hours are we going to have this to go on? Or? Look, here's what I think
Give me the
happened.
Cliff Notes.
Yeah. The Reagan administration gave an opportunity for people in the South who are already changing to the Republican Party. And you saw that over the years, even in the days of Reagan and well, Jerry Ford was essentially the kind of moderate you're talking about. But as we went along, a senator like Strom Thurmond, remember him? He was a Democratic senator from South Carolina. He ran for the Dixiecrats in 1948. That broke with the Democratic Party and ran him for president. They went to the Republicans, and there was a steady stream of office holders and leaders in the southern states, the Confederate states, that moved to the Republican Party. That made the Republican Party much different, and it made cultural issues much, much more divisive. I remember not that, well, maybe it is that long ago, but I remember when there were Republicans who were elected to the state Senate in St. Louis County who were pro-choice, and they were proudly pro-choice, and they didn't worry about that, and they won re-election in places like, oh, I can't remember, maybe Olivet, Creve Coeur, places like that. But you hardly ever hear that anymore. What I'm talking about is a process of polarization of the parties where they split apart in Congress and in the electorate. And they split apart because leaders in the Republican Party moved it to the right and took the moderates who were going to stay with the Republican Party and pulled them to the right with them. The archetypical person who represented this was Newt Gingrich, Speaker of the House, who wanted to use polarization to gain power. He did that, he emphasized that, and Republicans have done that ever since. There was a limit to it for some presidents. President Bush did that. You will remember in 2004, the Republican Party pushed for banning, for special laws that people would vote on in the November election to ban gay marriage. And that helped bring out more socially conservative voters who then also voted Republican. Well, Americans' views on gay marriage have changed substantially since then, but those culture wars have really helped divide the public. Add to that the fact that in the Democratic Party, some of the moderates in places like Vermont, there was a guy named Jim Jeffords in the Senate in Vermont, but he had been a Republican during the Reagan administration, and he left the party because the Reagan administration was too conservative for Jeffords. So we've seen polarization in the South and a kind of a counter polarization in the Northeast in New England. Once upon a time, Massachusetts used to be rock-ribbed Republican. And in the 1936 election, people made fun of an old prediction that was made by people: as Maine goes, so goes the nation. After the 1936 election, they made fun of it by saying, you know, now after the second Roosevelt landslide, as Maine goes, so goes Vermont, and that's it. Because they were a pretty Republican pair of states. Well, that's changed. Those are pretty Democratic states now with Republican enclaves in them. The woodsy part of Maine is now still pretty Republican. It's a rural area, not a lot of college educated voters. But even there, I think there's an expectation that Biden has a chance to just sweep through New England. So that polarization really has widened the gap and made people very angry with each other. And they really think of themselves as separate tribes that are endangered, personally endangered by people. The late Herman Cain announced for president in, I can't remember what year it was, ran in primaries. And at that time, if you took a poll of Democrats and Republicans about Godfather's Pizza, his company, before he declared his presidential ambitions as a Republican, there wasn't much difference. But you could see the polls split just because he declared with his Republicanism. Republicans liked Godfather's Pizza more and Democrats liked it less. That tells you a lot about how deep this is. It's a serious problem. I don't quite know how to fix it. Maybe one of the two parties getting the tar beat out of them make things a little bit better, but I'm not optimistic about that. So you're right to the heart of the matter. I know John had a question up there.
The question was, just goes along with that. It's always been my thought that one of the contributing factors to this polarization is the gerrymandering of districts where there's no need to find the middle ground.
Right. A lot of people think that. I think it could make a difference and it could be overstated. And these ideas that you could make the districts, as in the Clean Missouri plan that was passed in the state not long ago, gives some preference to drawing the districts so that they're divided equally, well, not equally, but in a relatively competitive partisan way. So, because there are very safe Republican districts. But look, if you were to just take a line and say, we're going to draw people so that people in St. Louis are all together in a district, people in St. Louis County and in areas that are a little bit like St. Louis County around it, make up another area, you'd have a heck of a lot of Democratic votes larger than Republicans. And if you drew lines in the Boot Heel and in Northwest Missouri, you'd have a heck of a lot of Republican voters, no matter what. So, gerrymandering doesn't really change where people actually live. And I'd hate to see maps drawn crazily, with all kinds of fingers and extensions just to make them a little bit more equal. I like the idea that St. Louis finally, it's taken quite a while, but that's quite a while of depopulation. I like the idea that St. Louis votes as one unit with some of St. Louis County. But having said that, I think gerrymandering makes a little bit of a difference, but I don't think it would change things dramatically as much as time does. Who would have thought that Ann Wagner would be endangered at this point? But that's because of demographic change. more than anything else. So that's the way I look at that.
We have a couple more questions. I think can we take a couple more questions, David? Are you okay with that?
Yes, a question. What's your opinion of the result on the Clean Missouri vote?
Oh, I think it had widespread support. It won in most of the counties in the state. It won in suburban areas and all the urban areas, of course, and it won by a very big margin. So I think that some of the most conservative counties are going to vote. It's the next test that we have if people understand that I think it's Amendment 3, Amendment 2, I can't remember which number it is at this point, Amendment 3, is passed by the legislature, put before the voters in November, asking them to change the redistricting system, the gerrymandering system, and a few other things in a way that would certainly water down Clean Missouri. It was a pretty strong measure. So we'll have to see how that goes. Personally, I did an op-ed in the Post-Dispatch supporting Clean Missouri, and I have opposed the current legislative proposal to change it. I understand some of the arguments against it. I don't find them compelling personally. So I just tell you where I am on that. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve Rudinski, do you have a question?
Yes. What percentage of people actually switch parties between presidential elections?
First of all, the only way there's two ways to know that. About half the states require you to register, and in those numbers showed some drops for Republicans, and probably some increases for Republicans in some states. All I can say is that my niece, dyed-in-the-wool Republican in Colorado, changed to an independent right after the election of Donald Trump. She was pretty angry about it. But there are changes on both sides. So I don't know those numbers. But another way to look at it is to look at who identifies as a Republican or a Democrat. In Missouri and in half the states, you don't have to register as a Republican or Democrat. That's not the same thing as taking a Democratic ballot like we do here, or a Republican ballot in the primary. You can change that at the next election. But here, you would have to ask people a public opinion poll about their party identity. That shifts more than you would think over time. And it doesn't shift a lot, and it doesn't exactly coincide with these big events. So looking at those party identification figures, actually, both of the two political parties are well under 50%. The Republicans are a little bit behind the Democrats. Again, if it's a national poll, you don't know where those people are. Probably a lot more Democrats in California, a lot more Republicans in the old Confederate states. But the group that leads the other two parties are independents. Now, the other thing about that is you can follow up and ask people who say they're independent questions about, well, do you mostly vote for Republicans or mostly for Democrats? I'm independent, but when they tell you they vote mostly for Republicans, you pretty much have a good idea that they're Republicans. So it gets complicated to figure out the answer to your question, even if you have the numbers in front of you. Does that help?
Steve Rudinski,
No, it
do you
doesn't,
have a
but
question?
that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I have a question. What do you think about having a citizen voter ID number for everybody that's a citizen in the United States? With our technology today, you could use this number, but only once. You could use it to vote in person, or you could vote on your computer. This would get rid of all of these mail-in problems that we have with ballots not showing up, multiple ballots from the same person. Why in this time that, you know, we're in a great technology computer era now. Why wouldn't we go to something like this? It would make things so much easier. And we would know who are citizens and who are not citizens.
Right. First of all, mail-in voting does not have the problems that are being raised about it. It's been used for many, many years. The military, members of the military have to cast absentee ballots. We've had absentee ballots in all kinds of places. They're mail-in ballots. Political scientists have studied this a lot, and there's just not much fraud and abuse that goes on with mail-in ballots. I know people are suspicious about it, but there's not much evidence of that. And one of the reasons is that you have to identify yourself legally to get a mail ballot. You have to register to vote and so on. So the problems aren't as serious as are reputed in public discourse. But having said that, I'm a little wary of voting with computers at this point. As much as I think your ideas make a lot of sense, I'm a little concerned about hacking and if hacking will become more important. I would be concerned about an administration that people don't like, limiting those numbers and manipulating those numbers to sort of restrict the number of voters who might be eligible to vote, not being able to cast ballots online, and having some problems and benefiting that administration and its elections disproportionately and unfairly. I'm a little worried about the way you could manipulate that number. One of the things that we know about 2016, where there was some Russian impact on some of the votes, is that it was very helpful to have a state-based election system because we're so diverse and so kind of messed up that the advantage is it's really hard to hack the system. So I'm not entirely on board with getting rid of the states managing the elections and trying to keep things in order. And I think most of the states do as reasonably good a job as they can with the rules they've got. Again, Arizona has long had Republicans in place. Like other Western states, they've got mail-in voting. That seems to be proceeding quite well. So that's what I see as a fair-minded analysis of this whole issue. Does that help? Sorry?
Harvey Gerstein has a question.
Okay.
I see a split in the Democratic Party with the squad, the OAC group, and the establishment. And the OAC group has been even campaigning against incumbents and putting up what they feel is more progressive people. Do you see the split growing?
Once Democrats are in office, anybody who knows the Democratic Party knows the old Will Rogers quote that I'm not a member of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat. That was Will Rogers, and I think a lot of people agree with that sentiment. Now, yeah, you're going to have conflicts over what should happen. If the Democrats win the Senate, keep the House, and have the presidency, they're going to have a 2-year opportunity, like Barack Obama did, to pass legislation that they want to pass. People are going to take advantage of that, and the kind of Green New Deal people, the Medicare for all supporters, are going to push for their agenda, and they're going to push hard. they're going to have different opportunities because they represent different places. People who are senators from New York or representatives of New York are going to be different than Jill Shoup would be, who represents a more conservative constituency. So yeah, those splits they're baked into the pie, and you'll see them. The question is whether or not the Democrats have enough momentum from the election to work together. Well, they pretty much did in 2009. They were able to get through Obamacare, a huge, huge change in the medical care access in the United States. And you can see that as Trump is trying to do something and reassure people, because it's popular, about pre-existing conditions. That was put in place by Obamacare. But yeah, there will be divisive things. I think for now, on the big issues, I think on healthcare, on stimulating the economy, on science, on the environment, those factions can get together. Whether or not there'll be another issue that separates them, who knows? There always is another issue that you hadn't thought about when the new administration starts. So yeah, I think there will be tensions. There will be centrifugal forces pulling the party apart. That's the way the system actually was designed. But whether or not there's enough clout on the left of the Democratic Party to accomplish things, that's a really open question. What else have you got?
Well, thank you so very much, David. We really, really appreciate your talk today. It was very insightful, and I don't think we have any more questions at this time. John, do you think we have any questions?
I think we're good. I really thank you, Dave. We've all enjoyed this and have learned a heck of a lot, as always, when you're on board. And we appreciate the time you spent, and invite you back after the election to have a post-mortem.
Okay. Well, somebody will think it's a mortem anyway, so we'll find out who that is. So anyway, I thank you so much. I really have a great time doing this.
Thank you.
And your
very
questions
much.
were wonderful.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you, David.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.